Welcome to Judica County. My name's Josh Whitaker. As always, Joe Hamer is with me. We are attorneys at Whitaker Hamer. If you're watching this video, more than likely you have received our buyer's engagement letter. You have a real estate closing, a purchase transaction scheduled with our office, and you've received some documentation. Joe, as you know, we need a lot of information on our buyer's engagement form.
That's right, Josh. So today we're just going to walk you guys through briefly this buyer engagement letter and information sheet. So if you guys have any questions, we get a lot of the same questions. So we try to prepare this video to hopefully take care of the majority of the common questions that you may have. So starting off literally from the top, there's some information we're going to need from you. We're going to ask you for your full name and preferably if you guys can send us a copy of your driver's license or some form of identification that includes your full name. That's the easiest way to prevent any issues with misspellings. You'd be surprised how many times we'll get a contract and the name's misspelled and it causes a hiccup down the road.
Yeah, Joe, we see a lot of times a lot of times that's the first document we have that starts your file. We get an offer to purchase and contract from your real estate agent, from your lender, and maybe, for example, Joseph, maybe it comes in as Joe Hamer instead of Joseph Hamer. We get nicknames. We don't get middle names a lot of times. If you've just recently been divorced, recently been married, changed your name, haven't changed your name, it is very important that we know your exact legal name as you prefer it.
Exactly, and we're going to ask you for some additional contact information as well. We're going to get your phone number. We're going to get a good email address for you. And these are all things that we really need because whereas most of the communication is going to go through your real estate agent, it's still very, very important that we have direct contact information for you as well in case there's a lapse in contact with your agent or something like that. And we're also going to ask you for information regarding your marital status as well. So, that marital status information is very important, especially if you're separated.
It is. If you're in North Carolina, I should say Joe and I are licensed North Carolina attorneys. We practice in North Carolina. So if you're watching this, you've got a purchase transaction in North Carolina. In North Carolina, legally, you're married or you're not married, and there's no in between. There's no legal separation, married, not married. So if you're separated and you don't have some other agreement in place, your spouse might be needed at closing.
That's right. And so the main thing is we need to know that. We're not going to give you a whole rundown of the law today. The most important thing is that you just inform us accurately of your marital status. If you're separated, let us know. The accuracy of that information is important, and then we can contact you ahead of time and let you know what additional information or documentation we may need to make sure that there's no issue with your closing as we proceed to closing. So in addition to that, you're going to see as you move down the form, we're going to ask you if you're coming to closing, which may seem like a strange question considering that, I think the vast majority of people, they're buying a house, they're coming to closing, but that's not always the case, especially with COVID. The frequency of people attending their closings has actually dropped a good bit, and there's a couple of additional situations where you may not physically be coming to closing. And Josh, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I would say, Joe, it's always best if you are at closing. It's nice to have you there. If you're getting a loan, there's a lot of documentation you need to sign, and if something changes at the last minute, having you there can take care of a lot of things. If you're not going to be there, and we know ahead of time, you can grant somebody via a power of attorney. You can grant somebody to be your attorney in fact and stand in your place and sign. We can also do a mail-away closing where we get everything ready for you ahead of time, get it to you ahead of time, have you sign it wherever you're located, and then get the originals back to us. In North Carolina, the originals are very important, and we can't do much with copies. So if it's going to be a mail-away closing, there's some preparation we have to do.
That's right, and we can do it, and we do it all the time. But again, it comes back to let us know as soon as you can. Make sure you fill out this form, give us that information so that, again, we can prepare you, we can prepare your agent, and really everybody in the transaction, because there's going to be some nuances involved if you're not personally attending closing. So again, it's not a problem. We just need to know sooner rather than later that that's going to be the case. So as you work your way down the information sheet, you're going to see we're going to ask you about any kind of invoices that you're going to have that are going to be payable at closing. So We work together with your lender in the event that you are, using a lender and purchasing your home with a loan. And there's going to be a lot of information that the lender is going to provide, and there's going to be some information we provide to your lender. And in large part, all of these, miscellaneous invoices, if you have a home inspection, a termite inspection, septic inspection, anything like that, these are generally going to be things that we have to provide your lender. So again, getting us those invoices, payees, getting us amounts so we can go ahead and get that information over to your lender is going to avoid any kind of confusion or last minute changes in your numbers as we approach closing.
Another important thing, Joe, and it's one that comes up every day, no matter how many times we preach this, if you're bringing money to closing, so you've gotten your final numbers from your lender, you're bringing $1,000, $2,000, $200,000, however much money you're going to bring to closing, for the most part, that has to be certified funds. And that confuses a lot of people who don't deal with certified funds. But there's a law in North Carolina that states funds have to be immediately available the day of closing. So I need your funds most likely as a wire. I can also take a certified bank check under certain circumstances. If that's something you want to do, you need to contact us ahead of time. Normally a wire transfer into my trust account is how we're going to handle funds at closing. And I will tell you that's something you don't want to wait until the day of closing to do. You want to do it a day, 2, 3 days ahead of closing, especially if there's a holiday coming up. You may not have a final number, but you can get a pretty good estimate. But you want to get certified funds to us in advance of your closing, because obviously that will delay closing if we don't have them when we need them.
Yeah, and the funds to closing piece is arguably going to be the most important piece of your closing. And we actually have an entirely separate video where we talk in detail about bringing your funds to closing, things to look out for. So we recommend you check that out for sure. You're also going to see we're going to have a big section on surveys at the very bottom of your information sheet. And we're going to give you a disclaimer about the value of a survey. And obviously we're going to recommend everybody to get a survey in connection with your closing. It's for the cost. It's going to give you a lot of peace of mind. It's going to prevent a lot of issues down the road. It's going to give you additional title insurance coverage. So we're going to greatly recommend that you do that. And we're actually going to give you the ability to request our office to order a survey on your behalf. Now, it's important to note, if we're going to order this survey on your behalf, you need to be prepared to pay for that survey whether or not you proceed with closing. The surveyor is going to do the work. There's going to be an invoice that's going to be due, and you're actually going to sign our buyer information sheet acknowledging that you agree to pay that invoice in the event that something happens with your closing.
I'll tell you, Joe, I've seen a lot of surveyors now are requiring advance payment. So a lot of times now, before they even start work, we will have them connect with our buyer and have the buyer go ahead and pay ahead of time for that service. But I've seen a lot of surveyors trending over to that now.
And so you're gonna see, after you fill out all of the information that we've requested, you're going to get into our informational letter portion of this engagement letter, where we're going to talk about, a little about the closing process, what we do, who we represent. And so, Josh, can you talk a little bit about who we actually represent in a real estate closing transaction?
Yeah, in a purchase transaction in North Carolina, the closing attorney represents the buyer. We have some other obligations to other people, but our client is you. It's the buyer. So we're going to search title to make sure there's no title defects. We're going to make sure that gets conveyed to you if there's any problems, and we'll help you along the way to get you to the closing table. Now, while we represent you, the buyer, we also have obligations to your lender. So if you're getting a mortgage, we have to make sure their docs are done correctly, and we do everything that the lender requires of us. So again, obligations to the lender. And then the North Carolina Bar allows us to represent the seller in a limited capacity to prepare deeds, lien waivers, things that by contract they have to prepare. But our client is the buyer, and that's who we represent.
And our representation, when we talk about what our representation actually entails, our primary function in this transaction is going to be examining title to the property and ensuring that you're going to have good and marketable title to that property. So there's going to be some things, you may have some disputes with your seller, some contractual disputes, some things that really are going to be more for your agent and the listing agent to work out between yourselves. We're not necessarily going to get involved in any kind of litigious dispute over the terms of the contract, so much as we are just there to ensure that you are getting that good and marketable title to the property. So that's our primary function. And, in addition to dispersing funds and making sure that the disbursement angle goes correctly, it's to make sure that you got good title to that property.
Yeah, and in a perfect closing scenario, you don't have any problems, right? So in the perfect closing, your seller doesn't have any title defects. A lot of times you won't hear from us very much until right up to closing. The only time you'll hear from us ahead of time is if we have a problem. Like, hey, we found an encroachment, we found an old lien that hasn't been satisfied. Hey, there's a tax lien we need more information on. Usually, hopefully, you don't really hear from us until we tell you how much to bring to closing and we see you on closing day.
Yeah, that's right. And so, that brings us to maybe the most important part and what probably a lot of the folks watching this video are most concerned with, and that's closing day, and that's getting on record, and that's getting the keys to the property that's being purchased. And so it's important to understand the closing process and to come in with reasonable expectations of what you can expect on the day of your closing. You're going to come in, you're going to bring your funds, you're going to sign your closing documents, and a lot of people expect, that's it, I'm done, give me my keys, give me my property. And that's just not the way that it functions in practice. We've got to take your documents, we've got to review them. A lot of times we're going to have to provide those documents to your lender to review. We're going to have to update your title search. We're going to have to verify all the funds are in hand. And then we're going to begin the recording process. So you always have to have those reasonable expectations. Don't expect that you're going to get your keys as soon as you finish signing on the dotted line.
Yeah, we in our engagement letter we go over that. We want to make sure every state's different. You may be from a state where it's done a little bit differently than North Carolina. North Carolina is what we call a race state, meaning your closing is not complete until we're all done recorded at the courthouse. And like Joe said, there's a couple of steps for us to get there. So I would advise you never to come to closing expecting keys. Maybe the buyer and the seller, maybe you guys have an agreement. Sometimes the sellers will release keys ahead of time, ahead of recording. But that's an agreement between the buyer and the seller. If everything's just the normal order of things, keys will not be available to the buyer until we're on record at the courthouse. And so let's say you close at 9, between 12 and 2 might be something reasonable to maybe hope the keys are done. I usually tell people end of business day. If you close in the morning, if you're closing at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, we got a lot of work to do before 5.
That's right. So, and we're going to do everything we can to get that process taken care of as quickly as possible. And sometimes it'll be, 30 minutes to an hour after you sign. But set your expectations reasonably. We see too many people set up a moving truck 15 minutes after their closing, and they end up very angry and upset. And again, it's all about managing those expectations. So hopefully this was helpful information for you guys. We didn't cover everything, but if you guys do have any additional questions, you can always reach out to us, shoot us an email, give us a call. We're happy to walk you through, and we hope you guys have a smooth and easy closing experience.
Sounds good, Joe.